Hey, good morning, everybody. Hey, I love this time of year. I want to see if you guys will track with me today. It's always the guy with the microphone. All right. Hey, Happy New Year, guys. Way to get started here this morning. Now, I want to see if you guys track with me. I love this time of the year, and it's for a couple of reasons. But probably the most significant part of January for me is getting back into rhythms. Is there anybody else who that is your thing? Okay, so don't get me wrong. I love the holidays, but the holidays, when we talked about this before we stepped into them, they can get chaotic. And so schedules are just all over the place. It gets jam-packed. Your rhythms and your routines usually get kind of put to the side for at least a month or so. And January for me represents being able to step back into rhythms. And I'm the kind of guy who I really excel, and I really am strengthened with rhythms and routines. Is there anybody else who's like that? You love this part of the year. Okay. There's a second reason why I love January, and that is because there's a brand new year in front of us. And so I'm the kind of guy, I do thrive on change, and that may sound weird for some of you guys, but it also makes sense for a church planter. I love change. I love being able to step into new things. I love being able to see new things grow, new things to develop. And so as we step into 2020, there is a lot of excitement for me. There's a lot of anticipation for the year that lays in front of us. I'm excited for it. There's a little bit of nervousness for me, the unknown, but to be able to watch things unfold in our lives and in the church is just super exciting for me. So here's my question. How amazing would it be if you could predict what was going to happen in your life this year? How cool would it be? Maybe you've never heard this kind of a question in church before, but what if you could predict your own future? Now here's the good news. A lot of you guys, I believe this, a lot of you guys have actually gotten really close to this before. You've gotten very close to being able to predict your own future before. Here's how I know this. If you have ever thought or said this phrase, this statement before, at some point in your life, maybe you've muttered it, maybe you just thought it in your mind, this statement lets you know that you've gotten closer than you think to predicting your own future. And here's what you said before. I should have seen that coming. I should have seen this coming. How many of you guys have said that before? I should have seen it coming. I should have predicted my own future. I should have known that this was coming. Every one of us, we hit those seasons in our life where we find we step into messiness. When things happen, there seems to be chaotic moments. There's different stuff that happens. But when the mess starts to hit us in the face, there's times when we step back and we begin to mentally connect the dots, and we're left with saying, I should have seen this coming. There were clues, there were hints, there was a pattern. I should have been able to anticipate that this was coming. Now here's something that I know you have definitely thought before. Those of you who are more vocal, you may have not just thought this, you may have actually said this out loud, not about yourself, but about someone else. And so this is how we know that even if we're not interested in predicting our own future, we're really good at predicting other people's future. You've said this before. You should have seen that coming. You should have seen that coming. There's a lot of friends in your life. Probably, maybe you said this to some friends. Maybe you said this to a roommate. Hopefully you've never said this to your spouse, because that would make for a really bad night in marriage if you make the statement to your spouse. But you probably have had these moments where you've seen your friends making decisions. And it's kind of like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Have you been there before? You've seen decisions that your friends were making. You've seen the path that they were on. You were watching everything come together, about to collide. You saw where it was all headed. You saw what was about to happen, and you were able to predict their future. You should have seen that coming. Now, here's one of the questions. We're going to wrestle with this next week a little bit. Why is it that you can see what they can't see, and they can see what you can't see? Stepping back and being able to watch. Again, we're going to get into this next week more, but being able to see someone else, to see the path that they're on. And yet it's so difficult sometimes for us to see our own path. And here's the crazy part of it. Here's the crazy part. Sometimes we kind of do see where we're headed. We kind of know. We kind of know where things are headed relationally or financially or academically even. We kind of know where things are headed. In fact, maybe somebody in your life has dropped a hint or two. And they've made statements to you about seeing a path that you're on, seeing a pattern that you're in. Or maybe some circumstances start happening. Things start happening in your life, and circumstances drop a hint or two. We get these clues in our life that we might be headed in the wrong direction. But instead of facing it, there are moments in our life when, instead of saying like, oh crud, look where I'm going, I need to change, instead we just, for some reason, we just sort of look the other way. We just keep our head down. We refuse to acknowledge it. But when we arrive there, when we get there, when something happens, we act shocked and surprised. But the truth is, you kind of saw this coming. You kind of knew in your heart, you kind of knew in your mind that this was the path that you were on. And you and I have the ability, probably in more situations than we would care to admit, we have the ability, in fact, to predict our future in this way. So as we get started, I need to give you some bad news, and then I'm going to give you some good news. And for some of you, this might actually explain why you're experiencing some of the things that you're experiencing in life right now. Here's the bad news. Bad news is this. Most personal problems can't be fixed. Not in the way that we often think. I didn't think I'd get an amen on that. It's not like this. So this is the bad news, okay? Most personal problems can't be just fixed. And here's why. This is so important for us. You fix a car, you fix a computer, you get your oven fixed, you get your lawnmower fixed, you get a dog fixed. That's a whole different kind of fix, I think. But you get all these things fixed. And when they are fixed, when it's fixed, they're as good as new. It's like it never happened. And I really don't need to tell you this, but just for in light of where we're going today, I'm going to say it anyway. You're not like a car. You're not like a computer. We're more complex. God made us, and we've been created more complex than something that you could simply plug in or unplug, something that you could reboot or you could repair. So the bad news is that you can't really just fix personal problems the way that you would fix a car or a computer. But here's the good news. The good news, and this is where we're going for the next couple of weeks, the good news is this. Most personal problems can be avoided. And this series that we're going to take for this month of January is about seeing where you're headed. Really knowing the path that you're on. Being very intentional, seeing clearly the direction that you're going so that you can avoid many of the problems. Listen, there's a lot of things in life that we can't avoid. There's a lot of craziness, there's a lot of pain that we can't avoid. Why in the world would we bring extra upon ourselves when, if we just pay attention to the path we're on, there's a lot of these things that we can avoid. So at the center of this entire series, we're going to talk about a single principle. And this principle is something that today we're going to take the whole day, the whole sermon here. You guys are going to be here all day. Did you know that? We sent out that notice. Sorry, that was a little blunder. But today we're going to take this series and we're just going to introduce it because it's centered around a single principle. It's a principle that we're going to call the principle of the path. The principle of the path. And I'm going to give you the principle of the path at the very end of the message today. But first, I'm going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to talk about this word because it's very important for where we're going. It's a very intuitive word. You're going to pick up on this stuff very quickly. But sometimes we just need to hear it said in a way that maybe we haven't heard it said before, that maybe it will just help us unlock some things. So here's a few words about our principle. First of all, a principle is not a rule that you follow. principle is not a rule that you follow. Actually, a principle follows you. Principles follow you everywhere you go. Even if you're not aware of them, principles follow you everywhere you go. A principle is also something, it's not something that you choose to apply. You don't choose to apply a principle. In fact, the thing about a principle is a principle applies itself to you. A principle applies itself to you. And a principle is not a law that you can break. But if you ignore a principle can break you. So this is really, really important. Maybe an illustration from high school would help you in this situation here. Some of you may remember the name Archimedes, or the Archimedes principle. The Archimedes principle applies to you every time that you get into the pool, every time that you get on a boat, every time you throw something into the water and it sinks. The Archimedes principle applies itself to you. Now, you might say, wait a second, I don't know who Archimedes is. I don't know the Archimedes principle. It's not fair that the Archimedes principle would impact my life. But that's the thing about a principle, is that it applies itself to you whether you choose to apply them or not in your life. Whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, you're not going to get away from the Archimedes principle when you're dealing with water. It's working in the background of your life. Now, as some of you may have put two and two together, the Archimedes principle, Archimedes is the one who gave us the principle of buoyancy. Why things float and why things sink. And so get this, around the 3rd century, Archimedes explained to the world what had been going on in the world since the beginning of the world, but nobody had ever put words to it. And so in mathematical terms, he explained why pebbles would sink and why cruise ships would float. It's the principle of buoyancy. Because principles, here's something we'll learn. Principles are experienced and principles are explained, but they're not invented. You don't create a principle, you discover it. You find a way to put words to it. This is something that's happening in life, it's happening in the background, and you find a way to put words to it. And this is what Archimedes did. He did not invent buoyancy. Are you following me? He did not invent buoyancy. He defined it. He found a way to put words to it so we understood what was happening in our life every time we dealt with water. He helped us to understand that every single time. Nobody made this up. Nobody makes up principles. Principles are discovered. And so you can choose to apply that, you can choose to leverage it in your life and use it for good, or you can ignore it and, in this case, sink. It can have adverse effects on your life. And all of this example here, all of this is true for the principle of the path that we're going to be talking about. Now, in order for us to fully appreciate this, in order for us to grasp it well, I have to explain one other thing before we get into it, okay? This is called the principle of the path, and it's a path, it's not a solution. It's a direction that we're headed. It's not a solution. There's a difference between a path and a solution. If you get lost and you pull over to ask for directions, you're not asking for a solution, you're asking for directions. And all the men in the room said, absolutely, that's what I do. I pull over and I ask for directions, right? I'm not sure why this is true, but when, have you ever noticed this? When men get lost, we go faster. It's like we're going to hurry up and get found again. I'm not sure why. But when you get lost, it's a joke. None of you guys are following. Listen, it's 2020. You guys are going to help me out this year. I'm going to need it, okay? Those of you who use your Waze app, and it's like a GPS thing, it helps you find it. If your Waze app takes you to an abandoned warehouse or an empty parking garage, and you're supposed to be at somebody's house, you don't call them, somebody who you're supposed to be visiting, you don't call them and ask for a solution. You don't ask them to fix it. You say, I'm lost, I need directions. This principle is a principle of the path. It's not a principle of a solution. It's not a fix-it. There was a few years ago, my family and I own a little cabin at past Woodland Park, and we had some potential renters, some people who were wanting to meet me there and look at this cabin to rent it. And they called me. They were 20, 30 minutes late, and they called me, and they said, we can't find the cabin. And I said, well, I'm here. Where are you? They said, we don't know, we're lost. And I said, did you follow the directions I gave you? Well, we thought we did. And I said, well, why don't you go back to Divide and follow those directions? And they said, well, how about this? How about you just come get us? I said, I don't know where you are. You don't know where you are. I can't just come fix this. You need to go back to Divide and follow the directions. And here's what we know. When we're lost, and you guys know this, there's not a fix to being lost. There's not a solution to getting unlost. And it's because of this. You get to where we should be the same way that we got to where we shouldn't be. We follow a path. Every time that we got lost in our life, we followed a path there. We made a wrong turn, we went a wrong direction, and we followed a path there. The way that you get to where you should be is the same way that you get to where you shouldn't be. You follow a path there. Somebody doesn't come into your life and just fix it, and they don't just solve it. If you're lost, if you're headed the wrong direction, we've got a direction problem. We've got an issue here, because here's the truth. Our lives don't need fixed. We just need new direction. And that's going to apply for anybody, whether they know Jesus as their Savior or not. Maybe you've been serving Him for a long time. Maybe you have yet to make that decision in your life. Your life doesn't need fixed. You just need a new direction. You need to start heading a different direction. And for most people who would ask for advice or ask for counsel, and maybe somebody has asked you for advice here in recent days, they've come to you and they've asked for, maybe they're looking for a fix in their life. And maybe you didn't have this terminology that we're using today, but intuitively you knew there's no fix for their life. They needed to move in a different direction, because these are people, this is how we would explain it, they've been living in the wrong direction. They've been going the wrong direction. Now, if I could just get a little personal with you guys today, some of you may be living in the wrong direction. You may be headed the wrong way. And the interesting thing about living in the wrong direction, the interesting thing about the principle of the path is this: you could be headed in the wrong direction and not know it. You could be living in the wrong direction, moving in a direction that's going to take you where you don't want to be and have no idea. And so it's possible, and this is why I'm glad that we're doing this series. It's why I'm glad that you're here today. Maybe you're going to end up watching online later on. It's possible that you're moving and you're living in the wrong direction. You don't even know it. This is why we're doing this series. It's helping us to identify the path that we're on. And we're going to talk more and more about that. Because when something goes bad, when something goes wrong, we're going to want somebody to help us fix it. Somebody to help us solve it. And the wise people around you are going to say, you don't need a fix, you don't need a solution. You need to change direction in your life. Because you basically get to where you should be the same way that you got to where you shouldn't be. And so here's some good news. I'm going to leave you some good news before we jump into this. When you change direction, things will eventually change. If you're looking for a quick fix and you turn your car around, if you've ever been lost before and you're lost, and the moment you turn your car around, you're not unlost, it takes you a while to get back. Eventually, if you will change direction, things will eventually change. You got to be willing to get on that path. You got to be willing to move forward on it. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you that everything we're talking about today, Jesus talked about some 2,000 years ago. The words of Jesus are absolutely amazing, and this is why I believe everybody should follow Jesus. The words that he speaks are absolutely powerful. He points to the principle of the path. And we're going to talk about that, where he does it. He does it in a different way. He does it in a parable. He does it in a story. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, we have this account of what the Bible calls the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most amazing teachings that Jesus ever did. He delivered probably what you could say is the essence of why he came, the essence of life. So the Sermon on the Mount, at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has covered absolutely everything imaginable in this teaching. And then he tells us this parable. He tells us a parable, and in this parable, he delivers to us the principle of the path. And so I want to kind of feed this parable to you just piece by piece today. It's going to take us a little while to get there. And if you grew up in church, you probably know this one. So I don't want you to ruin it for anybody else around you. And I don't want you to move too quickly. Don't go too far ahead. Don't rush to the end. Here's the parable. So here's Jesus. He's at the end of this incredible sermon that he delivers. And here's what he says. This is his parable. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, in other words, you're not just hearing them and saying, oh, that's really good stuff. I'm not going to apply it in my life, but that is spot on. He's saying, these are the people who've heard my teachings. Follow me, this is really important. This is the baseline of this entire parable here. People who've heard my teaching and they actually apply it in their life. And he continues and he says this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, puts them into practice, will experience immediate relief, relationally, financially, professionally, along with all the various alleys. Does anybody recognize that that's not even close to right? Like this is not at all. We know this. This isn't. Everybody's looking at it like, Jesus didn't say that. No, Jesus didn't say this. We know this is not true. We know this is absolutely not true. Here's what he said. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, puts them into practice, will have discovered the fix for all their problems. That's also not what he said. You guys are multiple choice now, right? I'm not sure. That's the only time I'm going to trick you, okay? It's the only time I'm going to trick you here. We know this isn't true. Now follow me on this. There's a reason why I put this up here. We know this isn't true. Jesus never promises a fix for our life. He promises and he invites us to live in a different direction. He invites us to follow. He invites us to a path. He didn't promise us a fix. He invites us to live in a different direction. He points to us the way forward. He points to us the way out. He points to us the way of life. So here's what he actually said. Trust me on this one, okay? Here's what he actually said. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. So here's the context. If you hear the words of Jesus and you apply them in your life, you're wise. You're wise to do this. And in this context, a wise person or a wise man or a wise woman who is someone who understands that your current direction is a great indicator of your ultimate destination. There's wisdom in that. You're wise if you understand that the path that you're on right now is going to eventually lead you somewhere. That's how wise people think. And so he continues on in this, and he says this, if you put these into practice, you're like a wise man who built his house. And so again, I told you, we're just going to take this piece by piece. So there's wisdom to take the words of God, to put them into practice in your life, and you're like a wise person who is building his house. Now again, in this context, building a house is like building a life. You're building your life. So this involves all different kinds of things here. This is a process. It's a discipline. It's something you're building. It includes your relationships. It includes your money, your career. It includes your hobbies. Everything that's anything that's important to you and important in your life. The wise man is someone who listens to what Jesus says and actually puts them into practice in building his life. Are you guys following me on this? This is the parable that Jesus is telling. This is the story. This is the teaching that he is providing. There is wisdom to take what he teaches and apply it in building your life. And then he finishes the statement with this. You're a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, in this first century context, when Jesus is speaking to this when he's speaking to the crowd, this represented something that's very specific. And everybody in Jesus' audience immediately understood what he was talking about. Because this represented the hard way. This represented the expensive way. This represented the time-consuming way. This meant that you drove by the construction site day after day, and you didn't see a whole lot of progress because it was taking a long time because they weren't cutting corners. There was no quick fix. They were doing it right. They were doing it solid. Everything. This is building on the rock. And this is the context that the audience was hearing from Jesus. And then he starts to tell about a second character. And here's what he said about the second guy. He said, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man. So what's a foolish man? A foolish person is someone who lives as if life is disconnected. That the way you're living right now has no bearing on what comes later. So the foolish person thinks, if something goes wrong in my life, I can just reboot and start over. I'll be fixed. I'll be fine. I can transfer to a new school. I can get a new job. I can get remarried. I can declare bankruptcy. It's no biggie. I can just start over. Now, here's the deal. Some of you who have walked through those things before would argue that it is not that simple. It is a big deal. It's not just a matter of starting over. Because the problem with the foolish person isn't the circumstances they're in. The problem with the foolish person is they're living in the wrong direction. And so here's what he said about the foolish man. He said, everyone who hears the words of mine does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And when Jesus said this, the entire audience there just moaned like, oh, this is not going to go well. Because here's the deal. Everybody hearing these words immediately predicted this man's future. They knew where he was headed. They knew based on the path that he was on. They knew where this was going. They knew it right away because building on the sand is the quick way. It's the easy way. It's the undisciplined way. And it always ends the same. And so there was no surprise when Jesus said this. The rain came down. The stream rose. The winds blew. It beat against that house. And it fell with a great crash. When the circumstances of life came and they beat against that life, the life fell. And everyone said they should have seen that coming. They built it on the sand. They didn't apply the words. It was a foolish man. They should have seen that coming. And the implication that Jesus is giving in the story here is that there's no fix to this. You're not going to just prop the house back up and put some new supports on it. You're starting over. And if there's wisdom in rebuilding, you're going to build it the way that you should have built it the first time. And you're going to build it on the rock. And it's going to take time. And you're going to use wisdom. And you're going to build it right. And so, if we went back to the wise builder, when the rain came down, and the stream rose, and the wind blew, and it beat against the first house. It beat against that house that was built on the rock. Jesus said it did not fall because those folks are so lucky. Have you ever felt that way before? Now, follow me with this. This is not what Jesus said, okay? You guys are going to go home and be like, I don't know. My pastor's all over the place. He's teaching me stuff that's not the Bible. Listen to me. This is what we think sometimes. This is what we see people whose lives are solid, and we say things like, they're just so lucky. I'm not lucky. That didn't happen to me. They're just so lucky. Things just work out for them all the time. You're just lucky and I'm not. And Jesus is saying, come on, that's not how it works, and you know it. You know it. He followed this guy, this wise builder followed me to this place. And here's what Jesus said. He said it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. And people are like, well, that makes sense. Of course it did. I could have predicted that future. It did not fall. The life that this wise man was building, it did not fall because he followed me to this place. He used wisdom. He applied the things that I taught him. He was on this path from the beginning. And he built on the rock, and he took his time, and he worked at it, and it was disciplined, and he didn't cut corners, and he didn't make compromises. And it did not fall because he built the foundation on the rock. So here's what I need you to know. What you are doing right now in life, where you are heading, is going to lead you somewhere. It's the principle of the path. As we step into a brand new year, listen to me, the reason I love New Year's more than anything else, I told you some other things up front, the reason I love New Year's more than anything else is it is the best opportunity that this world sees to start over again. To make changes, to make course corrections. And I want you to know that what you are doing, where you are heading right now, is going to lead you somewhere. The best way that you can start this new year out is to fully understand the path that you're on. To make the adjustments that are necessary. Because let me tell you, this is what breaks my heart. This is what drives me in ministry. It's when I see somebody who's living in a direction that's going to take them somewhere they don't want to go. And you've seen it before. You've seen it happen. You've watched other people. And the thing is, it's not like driving. If you make a wrong turn driving and you get lost, it sets you back for a while. You might be lost for 30 minutes. You might show up late to something that you should have been at on time. But listen, you can fully recover. In life, you can show up really late. And you can miss your teenage years. You can miss your 20s. You can miss your 30s. You can miss your children growing up. You can miss your first marriage. You can miss your grandkids. You can miss all kinds. You can miss so much stuff. You can miss what's most important in life, and you can miss it completely because you're on the wrong path. Because the truth is, and you know this, here's the truth. We can't wish our way, and we can't talk our way, and we can't pray our way back in time to where we got on the wrong path and we started going the wrong direction. That's why it's so important to really understand what path you're on. So here's the principle of the path. This was the longest introduction I've ever done. The principle of the path is simply this. Direction determines destination. Your direction that you're headed in life right now is going to determine where you end up. The best way to predict your future is to pay attention to where you're headed right now. Now we're going to dive into this in a couple of different places over the course of the next few weeks. But here's what's extraordinary. This is what's extraordinary. Your Father in heaven, whether you acknowledge him, whether you understand this or not, your Father in heaven cares so much about you that he sent his son Jesus so that we had someone who would lead us in a direction that leads to life. He loves you that much that he sent someone who could lead you into life. And Jesus said this, he said it this simply, if you will follow me, if you'll follow me, there's a path that I want to take you on. I need you to walk this direction. If you will follow me, that's the invitation of Jesus. If you will follow me, you'll be building your life on something that will last. And that's why the invitation that we hear every week at Timber Creek Church is the same invitation that Jesus gave in that first century. It's a single word. It's a one-word invitation. It's follow. It's follow. Jesus said, I want you to live the way that I taught you to live. And if you do, you're going to be building an enduring home. You're going to be building an enduring life. Because Jesus is going to lead you in the right direction. He offers a destination. And this is what's great about this principle of the path. Jesus provides the direction, and he leads you to a destination. The destination, Jesus talks about this a lot in his teachings. He calls it life at its best. He calls it abundant life. He calls it eternal life. Following him leads you to the things that you're looking for most. That you have to acknowledge, you have to recognize the path that you're on right now. And so here's what I know about you. Here's what I know about every one of you guys. You're going to end up somewhere in life. There's a destination somewhere. your school, your job, your relationships, your finances. There's a destination. Everybody ends up somewhere. And I want you to hear me on this. I want you to end up somewhere on purpose. I want you to know where you're going. I want you to make a choice. I want you to live in the right direction. And here's what we know about Jesus. Following him, if you follow him, you end up somewhere on purpose, but you also end up somewhere with purpose. You end up somewhere on purpose, but you also end up somewhere with purpose. And it produces a rich and a powerful life. So if you're here today, if you're ready for that, I'd love to just help you get the ball rolling on this. It starts with just placing Jesus at the center of your life. It's the best decision that you'll ever make to follow him. So I'm going to ask very simply, if you guys would just bow your heads and close your eyes. And if you're here today, you're ready to just make that decision, to make that call to follow him, I want to invite you to pray this very simple prayer. Say, Jesus, I want you at the center of who I am. Please forgive me for all of my shortcomings. Forgive me for my misdirections. Forgive me for my sin. Give me a brand new start and help me to follow you from this day forward. Be my leader. Be my Savior. Amen. Amen. And we're going to close here in just a moment. If you prayed that prayer today, if it meant something to you, if we're talking this whole time about following and about knowing where you're going, and you made that decision, as a church, we want to be able to just celebrate with you, but we also want to be able to support and encourage you. And so when you walked in today, you should have received a connection card. And on the back of that connection card, there is a box that says yes. And it's just the easiest thing that I would ask you to do for me is to take a moment and just check that box and put your name on it so that I can pray for you this week. Maybe if you'd love for me to reach out, I'd love to do that as well. Just let me know. But if you would take a moment to just check that box, and when we leave today, you can drop that at guest services, or we're going to have some prayer teams up here in just a moment, and you can come up and leave it with one of them as well, and they would love to pray with you guys today. And so why don't you guys do this for me? Would you congratulate them as you stand up this morning? Listen, the principle of the path is that your direction determines your destination. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, here's what I would ask of you. No matter how long you've been serving Jesus, or maybe you still haven't done that yet, maybe it's been a very short amount of time, no matter where you're at, here's what I would ask you to do in the next couple of weeks, that you would be very intentional about saying, I want to fully understand the path that I'm on and where that's leading to. We're going to be talking about that in more detail in the next couple of weeks. Living in the right direction, a better direction, maybe for some of you a different direction, and what that's going to lead us to in life. You guys bow your heads. I want to pray very quickly and turn it back over to Jeremiah. Lord, we ask just what we've been talking about, that you speak to us over the course of the next couple of weeks here about the path that we're on. All the different details, Lord, not just overall do we love you or not, but God, the different things that we're doing in life, these paths that we're following. God, we want you to give us clarity on what it's leading to. And most importantly, Lord, we want to follow you in each one of those areas. So we ask for your Holy Spirit to just give us wisdom, to give us clarity, Lord, but also to lead us. We pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. And everybody said, amen.